The air in Provence carried the sweet, fleeting scent of lavender, drifting through the open windows of Esther Johnson's stone cottage. The house, tucked into a quiet corner of a small market town, was modest, its walls weathered by decades of sun and stories, its garden a patchwork of herbs and wildflowers. At 60, Esther, a black woman with a gentle smile and eyes that held both kindness and resilience, moved through her home with the ease of someone who had made peace with the world. Her wealth, a staggering $100 million amassed through shrewd real estate investments, was invisible here. No chandeliers gleamed, no marble gleamed colder than her hearth. Instead, her life was woven into simple pleasures: the clink of a teacup, the rustle of olive trees, the laughter of children at the local church where she volunteered. Yet beneath her unassuming grace, a decision weighed heavily on her heart, a decision that would bind her past to her future. Esther stood at her kitchen counter, her hands dusted with flour as she kneaded dough for Ratatouille's side of fresh baguette. The rhythm of her fingers was steady, almost meditative, but her thoughts wandered to Marcus Tate, the boy she had raised as her own. At 5, he had been a trembling shadow in a Paris orphanage, his dark eyes wide with fear, clutching a tattered book of fairy tales. She had knelt before him then, her heart breaking for the child who knew no family, and promised him a home. Now at 35, Marcus was a billionaire, his tech empire sprawling across Europe, his name whispered in boardrooms from Paris to London. To the world, he was a titan. To Esther, he was still the boy who once cried in her arms when nightmares stole his sleep. She paused, wiping her hands on her apron, and gazed at a faded photograph on the mantel. A young Marcus grinning beside her at a village fair, his face smeared with crepe batter. Her chest swelled with pride, but a quiet ache lingered. Marcus had changed. His visits were rarer now, his calls shorter, his smiles polished in a way that felt unfamiliar. Still, Esther clung to the memory of the boy she loved, convincing herself that success had merely stretched him thin, not hardened his heart. Tonight, she had invited him to dinner. The table was set with care, linen napkins folded neatly, a bottle of Provence rosé catching the golden light of dusk, and a vase of lavender sprigs she'd picked that morning. Esther wanted to tell him her decision, to name him the heir to her fortune. She had no children of her own, no other family to claim her legacy. Marcus was her son in every way that mattered, and she believed this act would cement their bond, a bridge between her humble roots and his towering ambitions. She imagined his face lighting up, the way it used to when she surprised him with a new book or a trip to the seaside. The doorbell chimed, a soft melody that broke her reverie. Esther smoothed her dress, a simple cotton frock, its hem frayed from years of wear, and opened the door. Marcus stood there, tall and sharp in a tailored suit, his presence filling the small porch. His smile was wide, practiced, the kind that charmed investors and cameras alike. "Mama Esther," he said, his voice smooth as the wine in her hand, "you look like you haven't aged a day." She laughed, swatting his arm playfully. "Flattery won't get you extra dessert, Marcus Tate." But her heart warmed at his words, and she ushered him inside, the scent of his cologne mingling with the kitchen's aroma of roasted vegetables and thyme. He carried a bouquet of roses, their petals too perfect, likely ordered by an assistant rather than chosen by his hand. Still, she thanked him, placing them beside her lavender, with a pang of nostalgia for the days he'd pick wildflowers for her himself. They sat at the table, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Esther served the ratatouille, its colors vibrant against the white plates, and poured the rosé. Marcus leaned back, his posture relaxed but his fingers drumming lightly on the table. A habit she remembered from his teenage years, when he was restless or hiding something. "This smells amazing," he said, taking a bite. "Nobody cooks like you, Mama. Paris restaurants can't compete." "You're just saying that because I fed you first," she teased, her eyes crinkling. But as they ate, she sensed a distance in him. His laughter came too quickly, his compliments too polished. He spoke of his latest venture, a tech startup poised to dominate the European market. But his words felt like a performance, not a conversation. Esther pushed the thought aside. He was busy, she told herself. Success demanded a different kind of energy. After the main course, she cleared the plates and brought out a tray of madeleines, their golden edges still warm. She took a deep breath, her hands steadying against the table. Marcus, there's something I want to talk about, she began, her voice soft but firm. I've been thinking about the future, my future, and yours. His eyes flicked up, sharp and attentive, though his smile remained. The future? You're not planning to retire to some vineyard, are you? He joked, but his fingers stopped drumming, poised like a predator sensing prey. Esther chuckled, shaking her head. No vineyards for me. This house is enough. But my investments, they've grown beyond what I ever imagined. $100 million, Marcus. It's a lot to carry alone. She paused, watching his face. His expression didn't change, but his eyes gleamed. Just for a moment, like sunlight catching a blade. I want to name you my heir. All of it, for you, to build something lasting. Together. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Marcus leaned forward, his smile softening, but there was something calculated in the way he tilted his head. Mama, that's incredible. You don't have to do this, you know. I've got enough. His voice was warm, but his words felt rehearsed, like lines from a script he'd practiced. I know I don't have to, Esther said, reaching for his hand. But you're my son. I want you to have it. I trust you to honor what we've built. Her fingers squeezed his, searching for the boy she'd raised. He squeezed back, but his grip was fleeting, his hand retreating to his glass. You're too good to me, he said, raising the rosé in a toast. To family. She clinked her glass against his, her heart full, but her intuition whispering a warning she couldn't yet name. As they sipped, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Ruth, her oldest friend, who'd known her since her early days in France. Be careful, Esther. Marcus isn't the boy you raised. Talk to me before you decide anything. Esther frowned, setting the phone face down. Marcus noticed, his brow lifting. Everything okay? Just Ruth, fussing as usual, Esther said with a forced smile. She worries about me. She always has, Marcus replied, his tone light but his eyes narrowing slightly. Some people don't understand family, do they? Esther nodded, but Ruth's words lingered like a shadow. She looked at Marcus, his face glowing in the firelight, and told herself it was nothing. He was her son, her pride, her legacy. Yet as he spoke of his plans for a new office in London, his voice smooth as silk, a tiny crack formed in her certainty, a crack she wasn't ready to face. The night deepened, and the lavender outside swayed in the breeze. Esther watched Marcus leave, his sleek car vanishing into the Provence dusk. She stood alone in her doorway, the warmth of the evening unable to chase away the chill in her bones. Something was coming, something she couldn't yet see. But her heart, that steady compass of 60 years, felt its approach. The fire in Esther Johnson's Provence cottage cast a warm glow across the dining room, its flames dancing in the hearth as if celebrating the reunion about to unfold. The table, draped in a simple linen cloth, was a tapestry of care, a bottle of rosé from a nearby vineyard, its blush catching the light, a basket of crusty baguette, still warm from the oven, and a steaming dish of ratatouille, its colors as vibrant as the fields outside. Esther, her graying hair pulled into a neat bun, adjusted a sprig of lavender in a small vase, her hands steady despite the flutter in her chest. Tonight was more than a meal. It was a bridge to her son, Marcus Tate, the boy she'd raised from a frightened orphan into a billionaire whose name echoed through Paris's glittering corridors. She wanted to believe he was still hers, that the years hadn't carved a chasm between them. The doorbell chimed, its soft notes cutting through the quiet hum of crickets outside. Esther smoothed her cotton dress, its edges worn from years of love, and opened the door. Marcus stood there, his silhouette sharp against the twilight, a tailored coat hugging his broad shoulders. His smile was dazzling, the kind that could disarm a room, but it stopped short of his eyes, which held a restless edge. Mama Esther, he said, his voice smooth as the sun at dusk. You're making Provence look like paradise. Esther laughed, her warmth spilling over as she pulled him into a hug. You're the one turning heads, Marcus. Come in. Don't let the night steal you. He stepped inside, the scent of his expensive cologne clashing with the earthy aroma of her kitchen. In his hand was a bouquet of white lilies, pristine and elegant, likely chosen by an assistant rather than the boy who once handed her dandelions with a shy grin. She thanked him, setting the flowers beside her lavender, their perfection a stark contrast to her wild, hand-picked sprigs. They settled at the table, the fire crackling like a quiet confidant. Esther poured the rosé, its pale pink shimmering in the crystal glasses she'd saved for special occasions. Marcus leaned back, his posture easy but his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. A nervous tic she remembered from his teenage years, when he'd fidget before confessing a broken vase or a missed curfew. "This place hasn't changed," he said, glancing around. "Still feels like home." His words were warm, but there was a rehearsed quality to them, like lines delivered to an audience of one. "You're always home here," Esther replied, serving him a generous portion of ratatouille. "I made this just how you liked it. Extra time, no shortcuts." She watched him take a bite, hoping for the spark of nostalgia she'd seen in his eyes as a boy, when her cooking was his world. He nodded, smiling. "Paris chefs could learn from you, Mama. This is gold." She beamed, but the compliment felt polished, like a gem cut to dazzle rather than warm. They ate in companionable silence for a moment, the clink of cutlery mingling with the fire's soft pops. Esther searched his face for the boy she'd known, the one who'd clung to her hand at a Paris market, wide-eyed at the swirl of colors and scents. Now his jaw was sharper, his gaze guarded, his laughter a beat too quick. She pushed the thought away, chalking it up to the weight of his empire. Success changed people, she told herself, but not their hearts. "Marcus," she began, setting her fork down, "I've been thinking about us, about what I've built." Her voice was steady, but her heart raced, as if sensing a storm on the horizon. "This fortune, 100 million, it's too much for me to carry alone. I want to pass it to you, to make sure our family's legacy lives on. I'm ready to name you my heir." Marcus froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. For a split second his eyes flickered with something raw, hunger perhaps, or calculation, before his smile returned, wider than before. "Mama, I don't know what to say. You've already given me everything." His hand tightened around his glass, the knuckles whitening for a moment before he relaxed. "Are you sure? I mean, I've got my own wealth. You don't need to do this." His humility sounded sincere, but Esther caught the slight tilt of his head, the way his gaze darted to the side, as if weighing a chess move. "I'm sure," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're my son. I trust you to carry this forward, to honor what we've built together." She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. His skin was cool, his grip brief, as if he couldn't quite meet her warmth. "To family, then," he said, raising his glass. She clinked hers against it, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "To family," she echoed, but as she sipped, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Ruth, her friend since their days volunteering at a Paris shelter. "Esther, don't rush into anything. Marcus isn't the boy you raised. Call me." Esther's smile faltered, but she turned the phone face down, hoping Marcus hadn't noticed. "Ruth again?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes narrowing, like a hawk spotting movement. "She's always watching out for you, isn't she?" "She's family too," Esther said, forcing a laugh. "Always fussing, like I can't handle myself." But Ruth's words clung to her, a whisper of doubt in the glow of the firelight. Marcus chuckled, but it was a hollow sound, and he quickly shifted the conversation to his latest project, a tech hub in London, poised to rival Silicon Valley. His words flowed effortlessly, painting visions of innovation and power, but they felt like a performance, each syllable calculated to impress. Esther listened, nodding at the right moments, but her gaze lingered on his hands. They moved too quickly, gesturing with a restless energy that didn't match his smooth voice. She remembered those hands as a child's, small and trembling when he'd clung to her after a nightmare. Now they seemed foreign, belonging to a man she wasn't sure she knew. As dessert arrived, madeleines dusted with powdered sugar, Marcus leaned back, his smile softening. "You know, Mama, I still think about those crepe lessons you gave me. Burned half the batter, didn't I?" He laughed, and for a moment, Esther saw a flicker of the boy she loved, the one who'd giggled as flour dusted his nose. "You learned fast, though," she said, her heart lifting. Always did. But even as she smiled, Ruth's warning echoed, a discordant note in the evening's warmth. Marcus reached for a Madeleine, his fingers brushing the plate with a carelessness that felt deliberate, as if testing her attention. The fire dimmed, its embers glowing like secrets waiting to be uncovered. Esther watched Marcus, his face a mask of charm, and told herself it was enough, that her love for him could bridge any distance. But as he spoke of his grand plans, his voice ringing with ambition, a quiet unease settled in her chest. The boy she'd raised was here, but so was a stranger, one whose smile hid something she couldn't yet name. Outside, the lavender swayed in the night breeze, whispering of truths yet to unfold. The morning sun spilled over the rolling hills of Provence, painting the olive groves in shades of gold and green. In the heart of the small market town, the old stone church stood like a sentinel, its bell tower casting a long shadow across the cobblestone square. Esther Johnson moved through the church's community hall with a quiet grace, her hands arranging books on a wooden table for the children's reading hour she'd hosted for years. At 60, her face, framed by silver-streaked curls, carried the warmth of a woman who'd built a life on kindness. But today her brow was creased with a faint unease. The dinner with Marcus Tate, her adopted son, had left a residue of doubt in her heart, like a smudge on a window she couldn't wipe clean. His polished charm, the fleeting coldness in his eyes, and Ruth's cryptic warning lingered, tugging at the edges of her trust. Esther adjusted a stack of fairy tale books, their covers worn from eager little hands, and smiled as children began to trickle in, their laughter a balm to her restless thoughts. She'd started this reading program years ago, after settling in Provence, a way to give back to the community that had embraced her, a black woman from afar who'd carved a home among lavender and stone. Her $100 million fortune, amassed through decades of astute real estate deals, was a secret known only to a few. To the townsfolk, she was simply Esther, the woman who baked madeleines for church fairs and read stories with a voice that could hush a storm. As she opened a book to begin, Ruth appeared at the hall's entrance, her face taut with urgency. Ruth, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a heart as fierce as Esther's, had been her friend since their days volunteering at a Paris shelter. She wore a scarf tied loosely around her neck, her steps quick as she crossed the room. "Esther, we need to talk," she said, her voice low, barely audible over the chatter of children settling onto cushions. Esther's smile faltered, but she nodded, handing the book to a young volunteer. "Keep them busy for a moment, Claire," she said, then followed Ruth to the garden outside, where olive trees rustled in the breeze. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and earth, but Ruth's expression was a storm cloud. "It's about Marcus," she began, her hands clasped tightly. "I didn't want to say this at your dinner, but you can't ignore it. He's not the boy you raised." Esther's heart sank, a familiar ache stirring. "Ruth, he's my son. He's built something incredible. He's just busy." Her voice was firm, but the words felt hollow, echoing the doubt she tried to bury. She pictured Marcus at her table last night, his smile too perfect, his fingers drumming with a restlessness that didn't match his words. Ruth shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "Busy doesn't explain the rumors, Esther. I've heard things in Paris. Shady deals, offshore accounts, people saying he's ruthless. That tech empire of his? It's not all clean money. And the way he looked at you last night, like you were a means to an end." She trailed off, her voice softening. "You're planning to give him everything, aren't you?" Esther's breath caught. She hadn't told Ruth about the inheritance, but her friend's intuition was razor sharp. "I want him to carry on what I've built," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's my family, Ruth. I trust him." "Trust isn't enough when it's blind," Ruth said, stepping closer. "You've got $100 million, Esther. That kind of money changes people. I've seen Marcus at those Paris galas, surrounded by vultures, not friends. He's not the boy who ate your crepes and cried at fairy tales." Her words stung, each one a needle piercing Esther's carefully woven faith. Esther turned away, her gaze settling on the olive trees, their gnarled branches a testament to endurance. She remembered Marcus at 10, sitting under a tree like this, reading aloud to her, his voice trembling with excitement. Could that boy really have become the man Ruth described? "He's my son," she said again, more to herself than to Ruth. "I have to believe in him." Ruth sighed, touching Esther's arm. "Then talk to Dubois before you decide. Promise me that much." Monsieur Dubois, Esther's lawyer in Aix-en-Provence, was a man of quiet wisdom, his office a sanctuary of order amidst chaos. Esther nodded reluctantly, her heart heavy with conflicting loyalties. Later that afternoon, she drove to Aix-en-Provence, the road winding through fields of sunflowers and stone walls. Dubois' office was a modest space, its walls lined with books and the faint aroma of espresso lingering in the air. He greeted her with a warm smile, his glasses glinting as he gestured to a leather chair. "Esther, it's been too long. What brings you here?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "It's about Marcus," she said finally. "I'm thinking of naming him my heir. The whole fortune, 100 million. I want him to have it, to build something lasting." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Dubois leaned back, his expression unreadable. "That's a significant decision," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Marcus is successful, yes, but such wealth comes with risks. Have you considered a trust? It would protect your assets, ensure they're used as you intend." His tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp, as if sensing the storm brewing beneath her calm. Esther shook her head. "A trust feels like a wall between us. I want him to know I'm all in, that I believe in him." She thought of Marcus's smile last night, the way it hadn't quite reached his eyes, and Ruth's warning echoed again. "But maybe I'm rushing things," she admitted, her voice softer now. Dubois nodded, sliding a pen across his desk. "There's no rush, Esther. Take your time. A fortune like yours deserves care, not haste. If Marcus is the man you raised, he'll understand." His words were kind, but they carried a weight that settled in her chest. As she drove back to Provence, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the fields, Esther's mind churned. She wanted to believe in Marcus, to hold fast to the love that had bound them since that first day in the Paris orphanage. But Ruth's words, Dubois' caution, and her own nagging intuition wove a tapestry of doubt she could no longer ignore. She parked outside her cottage, the lavender swaying in the evening breeze, and sat in the silence of her car. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Thanks for dinner, Mama. Let's talk soon." The words were warm, but they felt like a mask, hiding something she wasn't ready to face. Inside, Esther lit a candle, its flame flickering like her faith. She looked at the photograph on the mantel. Marcus at a village fair, his grin wide and unguarded. She touched the frame, her fingers trembling. "I trust you, Marcus," she whispered. But the words tasted like a prayer she wasn't sure would be answered. Outside, the church bell tolled, a solemn note that seemed to carry her doubts into the night. The Paris evening draped itself in velvet dusk, the Seine glittering like a ribbon of liquid silver under the city's lights. In the chic Le Marais district, Marcus Tate's penthouse towered above the cobblestone streets, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the river's graceful curve. Esther Johnson, her heart a tangle of hope and unease, clutched a small tin of homemade madeleines as she stepped out of the taxi. At 60, her steps were steady, her cotton dress and worn shawl a stark contrast to the sleek modernity of Marcus's world. She'd decided to surprise him, to bridge the growing distance she'd felt since their dinner in Provence. The madeleines, baked with the same recipe she'd used when he was a boy, were her olive branch, a reminder of the love that had bound them since she'd found him, small and scared, in a Paris orphanage. The doorman, a young man with a crisp uniform, raised an eyebrow at her simple appearance, but nodded when she gave Marcus's name. "He's expecting you?" he asked, his tone polite but skeptical. "No," Esther said, her voice warm but firm. "It's a surprise. I'm his mother." The word felt like a shield, protecting the fragile hope she carried. The doorman hesitated, then buzzed her up, and the elevator whisked her to the top floor, its mirrored walls reflecting her anxious eyes. The penthouse door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hall. Esther pushed it open, the tin of madeleines cool against her palms. The apartment was a temple of glass and steel, its surfaces gleaming, its air scented with something sharp and expensive. Not the cozy warmth of her Provence cottage. "Marcus?" she called softly, her voice swallowed by the vast space. No answer came, but a low murmur drifted from a room down the hall, sharp and urgent, unlike the smooth charm Marcus had worn at dinner. She stepped forward, her shoes silent on the polished floor, drawn by the voice. The door to what looked like a study was slightly open, a wedge of light cutting through the dimness. Esther paused, her heart quickening, some instinct urging her to listen before announcing herself. She pressed closer, the Madeleines forgotten in her tightening grip, and Marcus's voice sliced through the air, cold and unfamiliar. "When she signs, the $100 million is mine," he said, his tone clipped, predatory. "The accounts in Switzerland are ready. She's too trusting, like some provincial grandmother who thinks love buys loyalty." A mocking laugh followed, sharp as a blade. Esther froze, her breath catching in her throat. "She's got no idea. Once it's done, I'll move the money through the shells. By the time she notices, she'll be out. Finished." The words landed like blows, each one shattering the image of the boy she'd raised. Esther's knees trembled, but she pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Through the crack in the door, she saw Marcus pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his face lit by the glow of a laptop. His eyes, once soft with boyish wonder, were hard now, glinting with greed. "She's so caught up in her fairy tale family nonsense," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Thinks I owe her for pulling me out of that orphanage? I've paid that debt 10 times over." Esther's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The tin of Madeleine slipped, clattering softly against the floor. She froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. But Marcus didn't pause, too absorbed in his scheming. "The board will answer to me," he said. "Next week she's done. A nobody again." The cruelty in his words was a knife, twisting in the heart of the woman who'd given him everything. Her home, her love, her trust. She wanted to scream, to burst through the door and demand answers. But her feet were rooted, her body numb with shock. The boy who'd once clung to her after nightmares, who'd laughed as she taught him to flip crepes, was gone. In his place was a stranger, his voice a venomous echo of betrayal. Esther slid back into the shadows, her shawl catching on the doorframe as she retreated. The Madeleines lay abandoned on the floor, their sweetness a bitter irony. She moved silently, her breath shallow, and slipped out of the penthouse before Marcus could notice. The elevator ride down was a blur, her reflection in the mirrors a ghost of the woman she'd been an hour ago. Outside, the Paris air was cool, the Seine's sparkle now a mocking glimmer. Esther leaned against a lamppost, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. The city's hum, laughter from a nearby cafe, the clatter of bicycles, felt distant, as if she were underwater, drowning in the wreckage of her trust. How long had Marcus planned this? Had every smile, every mama been a lie? She thought of their dinner, his polished charm, the way his fingers had tightened around his glass when she mentioned the inheritance. The signs had been there, but she'd been too blind, too wrapped in the love she'd poured into him since he was 5. Her chest ached, not just with betrayal but with the weight of her own naivety. She'd built a fortune from nothing, a black woman in a foreign land, yet she'd let her heart make her vulnerable. Esther's phone buzzed in her purse, a lifeline pulling her from the abyss. A text from Ruth. "Did you see Marcus? Call me. Please." Esther's fingers hovered over the screen, but she couldn't reply. Not yet. She needed to think, to breathe, to find the strength she'd always carried but had forgotten in her love for Marcus. She hailed a taxi, the driver's cheerful chatter a faint hum as she stared out the window, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. Back in Provence, she'd face him again, but not as the trusting mother who'd baked madeleines for her son. The illusion was shattered, the boy she loved replaced by a man who saw her as a pawn. As the taxi sped toward the station, Esther's resolve hardened, a quiet fire kindling in her soul. She'd built her life from sacrifice and survival, and she would not let Marcus steal it. The lavender fields of home awaited, and with them, a plan to protect her legacy and her heart. The morning light filtered through the shutters of Esther Johnson's Provence cottage, casting delicate stripes across the worn wooden floor. But the warmth of the sun couldn't touch the chill that had settled in her heart since Paris. Esther stood at her kitchen counter, her hands still, the usual rhythm of kneading dough or arranging lavender forgotten. At 60, her face, etched with lines of kindness and resilience, was now shadowed with resolve. The memory of Marcus Tate's voice, cold, mocking, plotting to strip her of her $100 million fortune, played like a cruel refrain in her mind. The boy she'd raised from a trembling orphan was gone, replaced by a stranger whose betrayal cut deeper than any wound she'd known. Yet Esther was no stranger to survival. She'd built her wealth from nothing, a black woman carving a place in a foreign land, and she would not let Marcus unravel her legacy. She sat at her small desk, a cup of chamomile tea cooling untouched beside her. Her fingers traced the edge of a photograph. Marcus at 12, grinning as he held a kite in a Provence field. The image stung, but it also steeled her. She'd loved him fiercely, but love wouldn't blind her now. Ruth's warning, Dubois' caution, and Marcus's own words had shattered her trust, and from that wreckage, a plan was forming. A plan to protect what was hers and expose the man he'd become. Esther drove to Aix-en-Provence, the road winding past olive groves and stone walls, her heart pounding with a mix of grief and determination. Monsieur Dubois' office was a haven of order, its bookshelves heavy with legal tomes, the air tinged with the rich scent of espresso. Dubois, a wiry man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, rose to greet her, his face softening with concern. "Esther," he said, gesturing to a chair, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "A betrayal." She recounted the scene in Marcus's Paris penthouse, the overheard phone call, his chilling words about moving her fortune offshore, his mockery of her trust. "He called me a provincial grandmother," she said, her voice breaking only slightly. "He thinks I'm too naive to suspect him. But I heard it all, Monsieur Dubois. Every word." Dubois' jaw tightened, his fingers tapping the desk as he processed her words. "I feared this," he said quietly. "Marcus has been too eager, too smooth. His reputation in Paris, those whispers of shady deals, should have been warning enough. You did right to come to me." He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "What do you want to do?" Esther's eyes met his, her resolve a quiet fire. "I want to protect what's mine. I want him to think he's won, but I want him trapped." Her voice was low, each word deliberate, like stones laid in a path. She wasn't the naive woman Marcus had mocked. She was the woman who'd outsmarted markets and skeptics to build a fortune. Dubois nodded, a faint smile of admiration crossing his face. "We can rewrite the documents," he said. "On the surface, they'll look like you're giving him control of the $100 million, full authority over accounts, properties, everything. But buried in the fine print will be a trust, one he can't touch without your consent. Dual approval clauses, restricted transfers, safeguards he won't notice until it's too late." He paused, studying her. "But you'll need to play your part, Esther. He can't suspect you know." "I can do that," she said, her voice firm, though her heart ached at the thought of facing Marcus, of smiling into the face of betrayal. "I've spent years loving him. I can pretend a little longer." Dubois scribbled notes, his pen moving with precision. "We'll need evidence," he added. "If he's planning to move money offshore, we can alert the authorities. But we need proof. Calls, emails, anything to show intent." He looked up, his expression grave. "This could be dangerous, Esther. If he senses you're on to him, he might act rashly." Esther's mind flashed to Marcus's cold laugh, his casual cruelty. "I'll be careful," she said. "I have Ruth. She'll help." Back in Provence, Esther met Ruth at the church garden, the olive trees whispering in the breeze. Ruth's face was a storm of worry and anger as Esther recounted the betrayal. "That snake," Ruth hissed, her scarf fluttering as she paced. "I knew he'd change, but this? How could he do this to you?" She stopped, gripping Esther's hands. "What's the plan?" Esther explained Dubois' strategy, the rewritten documents, the hidden trust, the need for evidence. I need to record him, she said, pulling a small device from her purse, a discreet recorder Ruth had sourced from a friend in Paris. Next time he visits, I'll keep it close. He talks so freely when he thinks I'm clueless. Her voice wavered, but her eyes were steel. Ruth nodded, her expression fierce. You're stronger than he knows, Esther. But you can't let him see it. Not yet. She showed Esther how to use the recorder, its tiny light blinking like a conspirator's wink. They practiced, Esther slipping it into her apron pocket, testing its range as she spoke in hushed tones about the weather, the children, anything to mask the pain clawing at her chest. That evening, alone in her cottage, Esther stood before her mirror, practicing her smile. She tilted her head, softened her eyes, mimicking the mother Marcus expected. Trusting, guileless, unaware. Each smile felt like a betrayal of herself, but she forced it, knowing it was her armor. She thought of the boy who'd once run to her with a scraped knee, his tears soaking her shawl. That boy was gone, but she'd play the part of his mother until the trap was set. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Coming to Provence tomorrow. Can't wait to see you, Mama. The words once a balm, now burned. She typed back, her fingers steady. Bring your appetite. I'll make bouillabaisse. She set the phone down, her heart a battleground of grief and resolve. The lavender outside swayed, its scent a faint comfort as she prepared to face her son. Not as a mother, but as a warrior guarding her legacy. The recorder lay hidden in her apron, a silent ally, ready to capture the truth that would undo Marcus Tate. The evening air in Provence was thick with the scent of lavender and thyme, a soft breeze rustling through the olive trees outside Esther Johnson's cottage. Inside, the dining room glowed with the flicker of candles, their light dancing across a table set with care. A tureen of bouillabaisse, its rich broth steaming with the essence of the sea, a crusty baguette sliced thin, and a bottle of rosé, its blush catching the warm hues of the hearth. Esther, her silver-streaked hair tucked neatly under a scarf, moved with deliberate calm, her hands steady as she arranged the last sprig of parsley. At 60, her face bore the grace of a woman who'd weathered storms. But tonight, her eyes held a quiet fire. She was no longer the trusting mother who'd baked madeleines for Marcus Tate, her adopted son. She was a strategist, her heart armored against the betrayal she'd overheard in his Paris penthouse, a plot to seize her $100 million fortune and leave her with nothing. The small recorder, hidden in the pocket of her apron, felt like a stone against her hip. Esther had practiced with Ruth, ensuring it would catch every word Marcus spoke, every boast that could damn him. Monsieur Dubois, her lawyer, had rewritten the inheritance documents, weaving a trap within their pages. A trust that appeared to grant Marcus full control, but locked her fortune behind clauses he couldn't breach without her consent. Tonight she would play her part, loving, guileless, the mother he expected, while leading him to sign his own undoing. The doorbell chimed, its melody cutting through the quiet hum of crickets. Esther smoothed her dress, her heart pounding but her face serene, and opened the door. Marcus stood there, his tailored coat pristine, his smile as polished as the city he'd left behind. Mama Esther, he said, his voice smooth as the Seine, you're spoiling me again. He held a bottle of expensive Bordeaux, its label gleaming, a gift too perfect to be personal. Come in, Marcus, she said, her smile warm but practiced, a mask she'd perfected in the mirror. I've made your favorite, bouillabaisse, just like you used to beg for. She took the wine, her fingers brushing his, searching for a trace of the boy she'd raised. His hand was cool, his grip fleeting, as if he couldn't linger in her warmth. They sat at the table, the candles casting shadows that flickered like secrets. Esther served the bouillabaisse, its aroma filling the room, and poured the rosé, avoiding his Bordeaux. Marcus leaned back, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up its prey. This smells like heaven, he said, taking a spoonful. You're making it hard to go back to Paris, Mama. His laugh was easy, but Esther caught the slight twitch of his fingers, the restless energy she'd noticed since his betrayal. She smiled, her heart a tight knot. You're always home here, she said, echoing their last dinner, but the words tasted bitter now. She steered the conversation to memories, his first fishing trip in Marseille, the way he'd squealed when a crab pinched his toe. Marcus nodded, his laughter quick but hollow, his eyes darting to the leather folder she'd placed on the table, containing the final documents. "Marcus," she began, her voice soft but deliberate, "I've been thinking about our talk. The inheritance. It's time to make it official. Monsieur Dubois has the papers ready." She slid the folder toward him, her hands steady despite the storm in her chest. "I want you to have it all, to build something lasting." Marcus's eyes gleamed, a flash of hunger he couldn't hide. "Mama, you're too good to me," he said, his voice dripping with warmth. He opened the folder, scanning the pages with a practiced eye. But Esther knew he wouldn't see the trap. Dubois had buried the trust clauses in legal jargon, invisible to anyone not looking for them. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his tone almost too casual. "It's a big step." "I'm sure," she said, meeting his gaze. "You're my son. I trust you." The lie burned her throat, but her smile held, soft and unwavering. The recorder in her apron hummed silently, capturing every word. Marcus signed the first page, his pen moving with a flourish, then the next, his confidence growing with each stroke. "This is history, Mama," he said, his voice rising with excitement. "With this, we'll take my company global. London, New York, Dubai, you'll see." He leaned back, grinning, but his words carried a boastful edge, as if the money was already his. Esther nodded, her heart pounding, but her face calm. "I know you'll make me proud," she said, her voice a perfect blend of love and ignorance. She refilled his glass, her movement slow, giving the recorder time to catch his next words. "Tell me about London," she prompted. "What's next for you?" He took the bait, his voice growing animated. "A new tech hub," he said, leaning forward. "With your money, I'll lock in investors, move funds to secure accounts. Offshore, of course, for efficiency." He winked as if sharing a clever secret. "By next month, we'll be untouchable." The recorder captured every syllable, a noose tightening with each careless word. Esther's stomach churned, but she kept her smile, stirring her soup as if enthralled. She thought of Dubois, coordinating with the French financial police, tracking Marcus's accounts for any move. The papers he'd signed were her shield, the recorder her sword. "Untouchable," she echoed, her voice soft, masking the resolve within. As they finished dessert, fig tarts she'd baked that morning, Marcus stood, stretching. "I'll head back to Paris tonight," he said, kissing her cheek. "Big plans to set in motion." His smile was triumphant, blind to the trap he'd walked into. Esther saw him to the door, her heart a battlefield of grief and strength. "Drive safely," she said, her voice warm, her eyes steady. As his car vanished into the Provence night, she slipped the recorder from her apron, its tiny light blinking like a heartbeat. She was ready for the next step, her love for Marcus now a weapon turned against him. The lavender swayed outside, whispering of justice yet to come. The morning light in Aix-en-Provence was soft, filtering through the plane trees that lined the boulevard outside Monsieur Dubois' law office. Esther Johnson sat at the polished conference table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her simple cotton dress a quiet contrast to the room's austere elegance. At 60, her face, etched with the wisdom of a life hard won, held a steely resolve beneath its calm. The sting of Marcus Tate's betrayal, his cold, mocking words overheard in his Paris penthouse, still burned, but Esther had turned her pain into a plan. The documents Marcus had signed, believing they granted him her $100 million fortune, were a trap, laced with trust clauses that locked her wealth beyond his reach. The recorder hidden in her apron had captured his boasts of moving her money offshore, evidence now in the hands of the French financial police. Today the trap would spring shut. Dubois entered, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting as he nodded to Esther. "It's time," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "Marcus is on his way. The authorities are ready." Esther's heart quickened, but she nodded, her face a mask of composure. She'd played the loving mother perfectly, luring Marcus into signing the rigged documents. But now she would face him as the woman who'd outsmarted his greed. The door opened, and Marcus strode in, his tailored suit impeccable, his smile as polished as ever. "Mama Esther," he said, his voice warm but edged with impatience. Monsieur Dubois, let's make this quick. I've got a flight to London. He sat, his posture relaxed, but his eyes flickered to the stack of papers on the table, as if sensing a prize within reach. Dubois cleared his throat, his expression neutral. A routine follow-up, Monsieur Tate. Just a few signatures to finalize. He slid the papers forward, but before Marcus could respond, Dubois pressed a button on the intercom. The room filled with the crackle of a recording, Marcus's voice, sharp and cruel, from Esther's cottage 2 nights ago. With your money, I'll lock in investors, move funds to secure accounts, offshore, of course. By next month, we'll be untouchable. Another clip played from his penthouse. She's too trusting, like some provincial grandmother. She's got no idea. Once it's done, she's finished. Marcus froze, his smile shattering like glass, his face drained of color, his eyes darting to Esther, then Dubois. "What is this?" he stammered, rising to his feet. "This is illegal. You can't record me without consent." His voice cracked, the polished facade crumbling. Dubois remained calm, his hands folded. "These recordings were obtained lawfully, Monsieur Tate. Your attempts to transfer funds were flagged. Every call, every transaction, every forged signature, it's all documented." He gestured to the door, where 2 officers in crisp uniforms stepped inside, their faces stern. Marcus staggered back, his gaze locking onto Esther. "Mama, you don't believe this, do you? You know me." His voice was desperate, but Esther saw the calculation behind his eyes, the same hunger she'd glimpsed in Paris. She stood, her posture unwavering, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I heard you myself, Marcus," she said, her words cutting through the air. "In your penthouse, in my home. You called me naive, a nobody. You thought you could take everything I built, everything I gave you." Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but her voice held no tremble. "I loved you like my own, but you chose greed over family." Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his hands reaching for hers. "Mama, I was weak. I got caught up in the money, but I love you. I can fix this." His voice broke, but Esther pulled her hand away, her heart hardening against his pleas. She saw the boy she'd raised, scared, small, clutching a book in an orphanage. But that boy was gone, buried beneath the man who'd mocked her trust. The officers stepped forward. "Monsieur Tate," one said, his tone firm, "you're under arrest for fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy." The cuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He twisted, his eyes wild. "Esther, please, tell them it's a mistake. I'm your son." "You're my betrayer," she said, her voice cold, final. As the officers led him away, Marcus's shouts echoed, desperate, hollow promises of love and regret. The door shut and silence fell, heavy as the stone walls of her Provence cottage. Dubois turned to Esther, his eyes soft with respect. "You were extraordinary," he said. "The trust is secure. Your fortune is safe." Esther nodded, her hands trembling now that the mask could fall. She'd won, but the victory tasted bitter, laced with the loss of the son she'd loved. She left the office, stepping into the sunlight, the air warm with the scent of plane trees. Her phone buzzed. Ruth, her voice trembling with relief when Esther answered. "You did it, Esther. You're free." Esther managed a small smile, but her heart was still raw, the wound of Marcus's betrayal fresh. That evening, back in Provence, Esther stood in her garden, the lavender swaying under a starlit sky. She'd made a new decision. Her fortune would fund a foundation for orphans across France, a legacy of love, not greed. She thought of Marcus, now facing a courtroom in Paris, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own ambition. She'd given him everything, her home, her heart, but he'd chosen to steal what she'd offered freely. Esther knelt, her fingers brushing the lavender, its scent grounding her. She whispered a prayer, not for Marcus, but for herself, for the strength to heal, to keep loving despite the scars. The church bell tolled in the distance, a solemn note of closure. She was no longer the naive mother who'd believed in fairy tales. She was Esther Johnson, a woman reborn from betrayal, her heart bruised but unbroken, her legacy a beacon for those who needed it most. Dear listeners, the story of Esther Johnson's journey from trust to betrayal and ultimate triumph in Before Naming the Billionaire. Heir to her $100 fortune, she heard his betrayal as a powerful testament to resilience and wisdom. Esther's transformation, from a loving, trusting mother to a woman who reclaims her strength, reminds us that true power lies in protecting our hearts without losing our capacity to love. Her story inspires us to cherish trust, but guard it wisely, to rise above betrayal with courage, and to build legacies that uplift others. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How did Esther's journey resonate with you? Have you faced moments where trust was tested, and how did you find your strength? Share your reflections in the comments below. Your stories fuel our community. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride, for letting Esther's tale touch your heart. Until next time, keep seeking truth and holding fast to hope. We'll meet again soon.